we take a look at 8.3 notes, again, we're going to talk about the equation of a circle. And here is the equation of a circle when it's written in standard form. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where h and k represent the center of the circle. H is the x value of your center, k is the y value of your center, and r is the radius of the circle. If you notice, h in the equation is negative, but outside of the equation it turns positive. K is negative inside the equation, but outside of the equation it is positive. So really similar to when we were writing equations of lines in point-slope form, you have to change the sign of the coordinates when you plug them back in. So whatever the x value is, when you plug it into the equation, change the sign. Whatever the y value of your center is, when you plug it in, change the sign. You might also notice that the radius is squared in the equation, so when you plug the radius into the equation, you have to remember to square it. Unfortunately, this is not on your formula sheet. You have to kind of remember this equation. Okay? It's one of those equations they don't give you. So I'm not going to give it to you because you don't have it for the OST. So let's practice writing an equation. And there's kind of a pattern to it, very similar to how we write equations in point-slope form, except we have x and y in our parentheses. So how I like to write it, when I have to write an equation in standard form, it gave me the center, which is 14, negative 1, and a radius of 12. So what I like to do is parenthesis x. What's the x value of our center? 14, right? It's positive, so when we plug it in, it's going to turn negative. And then square. Important to remember to square those parentheses. Again, whatever the x value is, right, plug it in and change the sign with the x. X goes with x. Plus, then I'm going to put y. The y value of our center is negative 1. So y goes with the y, but again, change the sign. It's negative, so it's going to turn positive. Equals our radius, but squared. If our radius is 12, what's 12 squared? 144. Good. And there's the equation of the circle. You don't have to solve for anything. You just plug everything in its spot, and then you're done. So let's try the next example. It says the center is at negative 7, 5, but they gave us the diameter. They didn't give us the radius. We have to know what the radius is. So if they gave us a diameter of 18, what do we know about the relationship between a diameter and a radius? Very good. The radius is half of the diameter, so half of 18 is 9. So the radius is actually 9. So make sure you pay attention to that wording. So when we write the equation, again we do parenthesis x. The x value of our center is negative 7, so x goes with x, but change the sign. Squared. Plus parenthesis y. The y value of your center, which is 5, goes with the y, but change the sign. And then we plug in our radius, which is 9, but we have to remember to square it. What's 9 squared? 81. And we're on page 13 of our packet. So there we go. That's how you would write an equation. This next example, we're going to go backwards. We were given the equation. We want to know, hey, what's the center and what's the radius? We want to know those two things. But we can get the center from the x and the y. Again, whatever is paired with the x is the x value of your center, but what happens to the sign? If it's negative, when we take it out, it turns positive. So it's a negative 9. We put it into the point, it becomes positive 9. Whatever's with the y is the y value of your center, but if it's positive, it's going to turn negative. So that's a positive 2, so it turns to a negative 2. And then to get the radius, remember, this is the radius squared. So think, what's the opposite of squaring? Square rooting. So what you have to do to get your radius is just square root that number. And what's the square root of 49? 7. Square root of 49 is. Questions over there? Okay, let's take a look at some more. Let's take a look at how to graph. So to graph a circle, what you're going to do is you need to know what's the center and what's the radius in order to graph it. Okay? So just like we did in that last example, identify the center. Again, whatever is with the x is the x value of your center, but again, what happens to the sign? It changes. So if it's negative, it turns positive. Whatever is paired with the y is the y value of your center, but again, change the sign. So if it's a positive 4, it's going to turn to a negative 4. Change the center. I also need to know the radius to graph. So again, what do we have to do with this back number to get the radius? Square root. So the square root of 36 is 6. And here's how you graph it. Once you get that information, to graph, just plot your center, and then count your radius. You're going to count your radius in 4 directions, up, down, left, and right. So we're going to start at our center and count up 6. Up. Does it look different on your paper? Do I have it here? No, it's right. Sorry. So we're going to go up 6. And then we're going to go back to your center and count down 6. Go back to your center, go left 6. Go back to the center, go right 6. So it should look like that. And then you just connect those 4 outside points in a circular fashion. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You will see mine will look very lopsided. But you just connect it like a circle. And we graphed it. The next example, example 5, we're going backwards. We have it graphed, and we want to write the equation. Okay? So, and you can notice in A, sometimes they give us the center, where in B, they don't give us the center. And we'll talk about what to do if they don't give us the center in a second. So again, to write the equation of a circle, we need to know what's the center and what's the radius. We need to know those 2 things to write an equation. We need to know those 2 things to graph it. So sometimes the center is plotted for you. So you just have to look at the diagram and write the coordinates of the center down. It's the point that's in the middle of the circle. So that guy right there. What are the coordinates of that point? What's the x value? -5. So what's the y value? 6. So the center is located at -5, 6. To get the radius, you start at the center. Remember, the radius of the circle starts at the center and goes to the edge. And there's 4 different radii you can count. You can count center to edge here. You could do center to edge upwards, center to edge to the left, center or edge down. But just make sure it's a straight line, nice flat line, it's not slanted, from the center to the edge. And then you just count. I counted 5, my radius is 5. Now we know the center, now we know the radius, we can write our equation. Again, it's parenthesis x. My x value is -5, but change the sign. Plus parenthesis y. My y value is +6, but change the sign. And what do we have to do with 5 to get our radius? Square it. And 5 squared is 25. And there we go. There's our equation. If we take a look at B, we don't know the center. They didn't tell us what it is, but we can find it. Okay? This is helpful for what we're doing on the next page. If we take a look at B, to find the center, we have to find a diameter. Because if we can find a diameter, that will help us tell us where the center is. So you have to pick a flat line either horizontally or vertically that looks like it's going through the center. Right? So this looks like it's going through the center, right? It's looks like it's cutting the circle in half, that green line. There's other flat lines, but does this blue line, does it look like it's cutting that circle in half? No, right? The part on the left looks much bigger than the part on the right. Same thing here. This is going through the circle, but again, it's not cutting it in half. This part of the circle is much smaller than this part of the circle, right? It's not going through the middle. So you have to find that line that's going through the middle, which is that green one. It's cutting it in half. Well, count across. All the way across is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the diameter. What do we know about the relationship between the diameter and the radius? It's half, right? And halfway is also where our center is. So cut that in half. So half of 6 is 3. So go back to where you started and just count 3. There's your center and your radius. We counted that our radius was 3, halfway across, and we found the coordinates of our center. What are those coordinates? What's the x value? 5, and what's the y value? 2. So now we know our center, now we know our radius. Let's write our equation. Again, it's going to be x what? If that's a +5, when we plug it in, it's going to be negative plus y, +2, it's going to turn negative. And again, what do we have to do to our radius? Square it. And what's 3 squared? And there we go. Questions over there?